my friends. It's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I want to say welcome to everybody who's new. I know a bunch of you are probably jumping in right now, coming over from the video that I made on the YouTube channel, or I was talking about changing the name of the YouTube channel and all of that business. I even had a few of you communicate that you've never done any kind of podcast thing before and that you were going to have to learn a whole new technology and figure out how to find this. So that's a lot of extra effort. And I just would like to take a moment on the front end here to say, you're awesome. And I'm glad you're here. And thank you for putting in that effort so that we could hang out more and work on this Bible thing. We're in Matthew chapter 27. We've been working on Matthew for a really long time, but we're drawing toward the end of this conversation. And right now, we have just finished the part where Jesus gets crucified and gives up his spirit. And then a bunch of miraculous things happen. And then the centurion is like, whoa, wait a dang minute. What just happened? Surely this guy was the Son of God. And then we get another account of some reliable witnesses, these being women who faithfully had persisted with Jesus, even funded what he was doing. And we find out that they were there at the cross, even though the disciples, almost without exception, had scattered at this point. And now we have a Messiah, a Son of God, who's dead. And the text has his body on the cross and it begs the question, well, what are you going to do with that? Is he going to get the unceremonious burial that often happens for people who ran afoul of the Roman occupying state? Is he just going to get thrown in some mass grave somewhere? If we weren't in Judea, Roman history tells us that the Romans were pretty icky with what they did with the bodies of the crucified. They just leave a body out to rot because they wanted to make a point to anybody else who would think about engaging in anti-state behavior, which is, of course, ostensibly what Jesus was convicted of. I mean, it wasn't a fair conviction. It wasn't a right conviction, but that was effectively the accusation. So what's going to happen with the body? Is the Holy One going to be allowed to see decay? Are crows and vultures going to feast on his body in a bizarre parody and mockery of the Lord's Supper that he instituted just a few pages earlier? Or is somebody going to step up and take a huge risk and do something about it? And somebody does, and it's Joseph of Arimathea, a guy who's famous because he's in all four Gospels. And as we discussed yesterday, we learn a little bit more about him from each of the four Gospel writers. Joseph of Arimathea is also very famous because of medieval legends and King Arthur stuff. He's associated with England, and he's associated with the most famous of all relics, I think, and I guess you can't really rate them, this is my opinion, that being the Holy Grail. So according to the text, Joseph of Arimathea has got this tomb. It's a new tomb. Nobody's ever been in it before. It's in the Jerusalem area. That was a huge win, a huge status symbol for him. He's a member of the ruling council, but now he's going to put his name on the line with Nicodemus, the guy who formerly would only come to Jesus in secret. These two guys are convinced, and they are betting that God is going to deliver on Jesus' prediction that he would be raised back to life on the third day. So they're going to bury him with honor at great expense. There's no way to hide this. They're going to suffer a social consequence for aligning with this person who's been completely denounced as a blasphemer by their fellow religious council members. And that's where we leave it. But I've been promising for a few days that we were going to talk more about this relic thing and about the legends associated with Joseph of Arimathea. So we need to get into that. First of all, what's a relic? That's one of those terms that could mean a lot of different things. Well, in religious history, as I understand it, a relic is an item associated with the divine from the past. It's a point of connection between the supernatural world and the physical world. It's some physical remnant left behind by a person or even a place that is associated with spiritual abnormality. I'm being general in my language here because relics aren't an entirely Christian invention. Relics and the practices of venerating or honoring relics or going to relics to tap into that power that was present whenever the first supernatural encounter happened with whatever that physical artifact is, that practice goes back way before the time of Jesus, way before Christianity, way before the Middle Ages when it became very, very popular. We see accounts of this in Thucydides and Herodotus, in other famous ancient historians, but particularly when we talk about the golden age of Greece, Athens and Thebes and Sparta and Delphi and their frictions with the Persians to the east. We get these stories of a whole bunch of these really very progressive, modern-looking democratic city-states in a lot of ways, but in a lot of other ways, very superstitious states who believe that the gods care very much about their governments. And so they go particularly to this one oracle in Delphi, and this oracle, the ladies who were there who would give them messages that involved some toxic fumes that mess with their brains, but these things carried great weight in policy making in the ancient Greek world. They would go there, and sometimes the oracle would be like, hey, you need to go and steal the relic or the artifacts associated with this demigod who lived centuries ago, and that artifact is possessed by this other city-state. And if you can infiltrate and steal that, then you're going to get their power, and then the outcome you desire in this war will go your way. Obviously, I'm using giant sweeping generalizations. Now, I understand you might listen to that and be like, that is ridiculous. That is primitive and superstitious. But come on, I mean, we kind of got stuff like that, right? The idea of like a totem or an artifact that represents power. If you're an American like me, every time you sing the Star-Spangled Banner, you're recounting, you're in a way even pledging your loyalty of belief to a story that's really very similar. And it's a piece of cloth flapping there in the wind, right? Now, I know the flag means much, much more than that, but at its fundamental physical level, it is a piece of cloth that is dyed and sewn together. But yet when we see that the flag was still there, it's like, dang, that means something. Like maybe in that situation, there were all kinds of curtains and jackets and other pieces of cloth that were also still there, but nobody cares about that because those other pieces of cloth don't mean anything. They're not a symbol of power, or for some people, and this is not the position I hold, but some people would say, man, that's more than a symbol of power. That's a sign of God's blessing or a deity's blessing on a people group or a nation or whatever. So, we still think this way. People, I don't know if they do it as much anymore, but for a long time, college rivalries, school rivalries, people would break in and steal the other person's stuffed Wolverine or their beer helmet or whatever the ridiculous item is that symbolizes the rivalry between the two parties. Like, ha ha. We stole your disturbingly effective mercury-laden chastity belt, and now we have it, so we're going to win the football game. It's just relic-style thinking. This existed with the Greeks, and early Christian authors indicate that this quickly became a practice with many Christians. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how early this seems to have caught on, but I know if you go and read Augustine in the 5th century, he seems to assume that people do the relic thing. By the high Middle Ages, there seems to be an expectation that there be some sort of physical, tangible artifact relic, a connection point to the time of Jesus or to a clearly ordained, miraculously powered saint who's come since, that there should be some kind of relic or artifact in every church altar. And what we see is that a lot of the idea of relics, a lot of the most popular relics, are all centered around the crucifixion. That's why we haven't probably had any reason to talk about it in our journey through Matthew until right now, as we're talking about Joseph of Arimathea in Matthew 27. This is because this is where all the interesting stuff happened. There was a spear during the First Crusade, during the siege of Jerusalem, that clearly had nothing to do with the side of Jesus and the crucifixion, but people believed it did. And then they weirdly worshipped the spear, and crazy things happened. It just turned bizarre. So that's a very famous item. I think that's called the Spear of Longinus. And I think that the French hereditary sword, Joyeuse, is, I think it's like a reforging of that. Maybe I'm not remembering that quite properly. But the impulse is in keeping with this idea of relics, where once again, at the most basic level, dang, this thing is symbolic and important because of its connection historically, or its alleged connection historically with this saint or this important moment or this great victory. So we've got that kind of symbolic view of relics, but then that ranges all the way up to a miraculous view of relics. This is something that was taught in the church in the Middle Ages. It was reaffirmed at the Council of Trent. That's a Catholic general council that happened in the 1500s. And the idea here is that no, relics are more than a symbol. Relics have actual healing power in keeping with the style of the event described all the way back in 2 Kings 13, where Elisha died and then somebody gets thrown in there, like another body or something gets thrown in the tomb of Elisha. And when that guy touches the bones of Elisha, he comes back to life and stood up on his feet. That's kind of the Old Testament precedent that a lot of the folks who believe there's miraculous power in relics and artifacts over the centuries would point to. And so for some, they would say, now there's straight up power to heal in these relics. Then some other teachings come along over the centuries where certain Christian leaders say the power is transferable. And so, for example, when I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem a couple of years ago, there were a bunch of particularly Eastern Orthodox Christians who had little, I don't know what you call them, like a scarf, tissue, and just one after the next, they're rubbing them on the plate where they say that Joseph of Arimathea had the body of Jesus prepared. I think that's what the stone slab is that is there as you enter the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I don't know. I couldn't get close to get a good look at it because it was just swarmed by people rubbing pieces of fabric on it. And they had like an unrubbed, not yet blessed with power bag on one shoulder, and then the other shoulder they had like the now it's been rubbed and now it has power thing. It sounds like I'm making fun of them. I'm not trying to make fun of them. I'm just trying to give you an honest read. They do not believe what I believe. I do not believe what they believe about this stuff, but I'm trying to just describe what I saw. And they would take one out of the one bag of unwiped, and they'd rub it around on the slab, and they'd put it in the other side, and just one after the next and one after the next. I don't know what they were going to do with that, if it was like autograph hounding at a baseball game where you try and get a bunch of autographs from famous players. Maybe you want to give them away, save them. Maybe they just remind you of how great that athlete was. Maybe you think that you can make a few bucks on it. I have no idea, but it does remind me that autograph hounding is kind of a form of that human impulse toward relic and artifact chasing. I'm going to make an executive decision right now. And for those of you who are new, I do this from time to time. I just want to keep working through this idea, and I want to do it in 2 days and no more, because I want to get back into moving forward to the end of Matthew 27 and into the final chapter 28. So I'm just going to cut it in half right here. I'm going to pause, and then we're going to pick it up right where we left off with this conversation about relics, varying beliefs on relics, Joseph of Arimathea, and the granddaddy of all the relics, the Holy Grail, next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.